As we go into our topic tonight, of course, our passage is Genesis 42 through 47. We are dealing with the part 2 of the story of Joseph. And we made a point last week to say that the story of Joseph is actually couched in the Bible as the story of Jacob, the account of Jacob. And then immediately it starts talking about Joseph, and sort of the main character seems to be Joseph, but the Bible couches it as the account of Jacob. So we get to see the second part of that. And as a brief review, last week we talked about how Joseph had been sold into slavery. He was taken to Egypt through no fault of his own. He was thrown into prison. When Pharaoh had dreams, Joseph was there to interpret his dreams. And so Joseph was exalted to number 2 man in all of Egypt. And when the famine came, we saw right at the beginning of chapter 42, moving into this week's passage, that Jacob said to his sons, y'all get out to Egypt and get us some grub, okay? And so that's where we pick up today. Beginning of chapter 42, Jacob says to his sons, why do you keep looking at each other? Listen, I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we will live and not die. So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt, but Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he thought something might happen to him. And we made the point last week that the whole point, the main point of the Joseph story is to show that Israel and his family are rescued out of the famine. They live and they do not die. And so the line of the Messiah is preserved. We don't even know who the Messiah is yet in Genesis. There's no talk of a Messiah, but this is already planned and predetermined by God that he is going to hold up his end of the covenant, which is to fulfill the promise that the seed with a capital S will come, and that seed is Jesus. Okay, moving on here in chapters 42 through 47. The brothers come to buy the grain. They run into none other than Joseph. Joseph recognizes them. They do not recognize him. He kind of plays some games here. He accuses them of being spies, and he demands that one of them stay as collateral until they bring back the younger brother. He wants to see his younger brother, and so this is the only way, this is the way that he contrives to get this to happen. So he says, we're going to keep Simeon. You other brothers bring me back Benjamin. Now, again, they still don't know who he is. Okay. He sends them off with their provisions, but he also gives them back their silver. And so when they find that this has happened, they are afraid. But they go on home. They tell Dad everything that happened. He is distraught because now his 2 sons from Rachel, whom he loves the most. He's already lost one. He doesn't know that he's still alive, Joseph. But now he's thinking, okay, I'm going to lose Benjamin too. There's no way I'm going to send Benjamin up there. He's all I got left. And so they try to talk him into it, but he says no. Reuben even says, you can kill my 2 sons if we don't bring Benjamin back alive. Now, I don't know how that helps the situation. If you're grandpa, how does it help the situation to lose a son and now you're going to lose 2 grandsons? But anyway, the point is that Reuben is so adamant that we need to do this. It is the only way, and he's taking it upon himself to make sure that it works out. Going into chapter 43, the famine was severe. When they ran out of the food, remember they brought back some provisions from Egypt, so when that ran out, kind of have no choice now. So Jacob finally relents. Judah claims responsibility for Benjamin's safe return. And so off they go again, the brothers, to Egypt for the second time. This time they take double the amount of silver. Just in case this was a mistake, they're going to come and, we didn't mean to take this silver back. Here's double what we brought the first time. There's a point to be made here, I think, which is that sometimes you can have all the resources, you can have all the money, and you can still be at other people's mercy. When they come back the second time, Joseph greets them again. Joseph actually brings them to his house, and he has a meal prepared for them. They're thinking, what in the world is going on now? They still don't know who he is. When he meets Benjamin, Benjamin has come with the brothers this time. He meets Benjamin. He weeps. Joseph weeps. This is the second time that the Bible says that he weeps. I believe there's at least 3, maybe 4 times where he weeps. This is the second time. And then he has this meal prepared, and they're sitting around his table, and he has them seated according to age. Now, 11 of them, that's pretty good guessing, if he were guessing. Of course, he's not guessing. He knows who they are. But they're kind of weirded out by that. How in the world does he know how we're ordered in our, it wasn't like they were teen to 3 years old, and you could tell by the heights. And so there they are sitting around the table, seated according to age. Once all of that transpires and it's time for them to go back home, he packs them up again and sends them home. But this time he puts a silver cup, Joseph's own silver cup, in Benjamin's bag. Once they get down the road a little ways going home, Joseph, has them pursued and essentially arrested. And they say, hey, stop everything. They check the bags, and lo and behold, there's Joseph's silver cup in Benjamin's sack. Okay, they bring them back, and of course, what have you done here, Benjamin? How dare you? Of course, Joseph knows this is all fun and games, but the brothers are distraught. And Joseph says, you have to leave him here. He's done wrong. But Judah speaks up, and he says, look, Joseph, he still doesn't know who he is, but look, fella, you have to understand the situation. And Judah explains to Joseph what he had said to Jacob, how he took it upon himself. He says, if I go down there without Benjamin, our father's he's not going to make it. He's an old man. You, Joseph, take me prisoner, send back Benjamin. If you keep Benjamin here, it's going to kill our dad. And at that point, Joseph, instead of keeping the game going, he's had enough. He can't handle it anymore. And so Joseph reveals himself to his brothers at that point. He has all the Egyptian people leave the room, so it's just him and his brothers. And he reveals himself to his brothers, and this is the third time that he weeps. And then the Bible says on this one, he wept loudly. And notice this now. He says to his brothers, the first thing that he says, once they know who he is, Joseph says, God sent me here. So there's no ill will. We're talking about 13 years plus another 7 years, probably plus a couple more. The famine is severe at this point. We're talking about 20 plus years that Joseph has had this time to stew and probably come a range of emotions and probably be upset for a while, but come to a place of peace and also a place of forgiveness and an understanding that it was God directing the steps the whole time. And so he does not take it out on the brothers. At no point does Joseph take it out on the brothers and look for revenge or anything like that. About the worst he does is kind of keep them in suspense and they're scared for maybe a few months as they're going back and forth home. So Joseph says, God sent me here. So he doesn't hold it against the brothers that they're the one that put him in that position. So he asked about his dad, is he really okay? Is he doing well? So forth. He tells the brothers, hey, you've got to go get him dad, Jacob, we're talking about Jacob, whose name is now Israel, needs to come here. He needs to come to Egypt also. Joseph is saying this to his brothers. Tell dad he needs to get up here. Y'all can settle in the land of Goshen. The land of Goshen is in northern Egypt in the kind of Nile Delta region. Y'all can settle there and tend your flocks there. Get down here because this is where the provision is. You guys need to be here. Pharaoh gets wind that Joseph's family's in town. He's pleased by this. He extends courtesies. And he says to Joseph and his brothers, take these wagons. So when the brothers go home to get Jacob and bring him back, they take these Egyptian wagons with them. And so off they go another time, back to the Canaan land to talk to Jacob and to retrieve him and bring him back. They return. Jacob, also called Israel, it's hard for him to believe what he's hearing. They tell him that Joseph is alive. Obviously, he's excited, but I mean, you can imagine the time of processing that would take to really kind of figure out what is happening here. But when he sees the Egyptian wagons, Jacob, when he sees the Egyptian wagons, he believes in what he's being told. And he says, if my son Joseph is alive, I've got to go see him. And so off they go, all of them, to Egypt to see Joseph and to settle in the land of Goshen. Genesis 46 has a bit of a genealogy. Again, it lists the people in the family of Jacob, in the family of Israel who go to Egypt. There are 70 of them in all. 70 people in Jacob's family come to Egypt. And Jacob and Joseph obviously are reunited. And again, Israel, the man, and also Israel, the descendants, those 70 people who become more and more and greater, settle in the land of Goshen. When they come back to Egypt, Pharaoh actually meets with Jacob and 5 of Joseph's brothers. And so that was kind of a nice gesture there. And finally, here at the end of our passage, the famine raged on. Remember, we've got 7 years of healthy crops and everything, and then 7 years of famine. We're only about 2 years into this famine. So now we've got 5 more years of this famine. And the people of Egypt, little by little, they have less and less to offer. I mean, you got to eat. Can I get an amen? So first, they bring their animals, their livestock to Joseph. This is not doing us any good, so they trade their livestock for grain, for food. And then once that's all done, now they come back, and the only thing they have left is their land. And so they actually sell their land to Pharaoh. And so Pharaoh is already the king, but now he's the landowner of this entire land. And these Egyptians who have sold their land to Pharaoh now pay, this is Joseph's prescription for them to pay 1/5. So he gives them seed to sow. They repopulate the land and with seed. And they are supposed to give 1/5 of the harvest to Pharaoh. And then the rest they can keep and recycle and sow the next season's seed and so forth. Okay, that is Genesis 42 through 47. Obviously, we only have 3 chapters left of Genesis. Next week, we get another important story in Genesis 48, the final chapter of Joseph and Jacob, and a really important story about Joseph's 2 sons and how they factor into this saga. That is next week. All right, that is tonight's content. Hosea chapter 11. You can turn there if you want to, or you can just listen. Hosea chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. I want you to hear what is written there. It says, when Israel was a child, Israel, this is Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, the man, and his descendants, the nation of Israel, when Israel was a child. So in the early days of Israel, the nation, I loved him. This is God talking. And out of Egypt I called my son. God is talking through the prophet Hosea. Israel called, verse 2, Israel called to the Egyptians, even as Israel was leaving them. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and burning offerings to idols. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by the hand, but they never knew that I healed them. I led them with human cords, with ropes of love. To them I was like one who eases the yoke from their jaws. I bent down to give them food. Verse 5, Israel will not return to the land of Egypt. Okay. Couple quick points here about this passage in Hosea. Out of Egypt I called my son. God called Israel out of Egypt. Number one, out of his love. Number two, Israel will not return to the land of Egypt. We talked about biblical theology last week. We see these pointers where we have Egypt experiences. Those are often ordained by God, but God calls those people out of Egypt. And when he calls you out of Egypt, you are not to return. This happens, or happened, several times, and I think it still happens today on many occasions. All right, now, who are the players here that had the Egypt experiences? We'll talk more about them in a minute, but Abraham was the first. Joseph, Israel, the man, and Israel, the nation that came from the man, 430 years worth. And who else had an Egypt experience? Jesus. Let's take a look at Matthew chapter 2. Again, you don't have to turn there, you can. Matthew chapter 2, I'm going to begin at verse 13. After they were gone, they is the wise men, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph, different Joseph. Matthew chapter 2, this is Joseph, the husband of Mary. Jesus is baby Jesus at this point. After they, the wise men, were gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, "Get up, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child and kill him." So he got up, Joseph, took the child and his mother during the night, this is Jesus and Mary, and escaped to Egypt. He stayed there until Herod's death, so that what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet Hosea might be fulfilled. Out of Egypt I called my son. When Hosea writes, out of Egypt I called my son, and God is speaking, I love Israel when he was a child, in other words, the nation of Israel in its infancy, at only 430 years old, I called Israel out of Egypt. That was a real thing that actually happened in the past. We call that a near fulfillment. But now we see, Matthew tells us, that this was also a prophetic utterance about Jesus. And so, even though it was about Israel and Israel fulfilled it, Jesus fulfills it again when Jesus goes to Egypt and God says of him, out of Egypt I called my son with a capital S. Keep looking here at Matthew chapter 2, beginning in verse 19, skipping a few verses. After Herod died, the angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, because those who intended to kill the child are dead." So he got up, took the child and his mother, and entered the land of Israel. Once you are called out of Egypt, you are not supposed to go back. Now, again, I mentioned that we talk about Egypt as a place of slavery, and we'll come back to that and talk about that more in a later week. But here we're talking about Egypt as a place of protection and provision. In every story that we have, and again, we're talking about Abraham, we're talking about Joseph, we're talking about Israel and his family, and then we're talking about Jesus. All of these can be seen as either a time of protection or provision or both. All of them experienced Egypt as a form of God's protection or provision or both. Abraham, do you remember why he went to Egypt? There was a famine in the land. That was why Abram, before he was Abraham, Abram and Sarai went to Egypt. We talked about it several weeks ago, when there was a famine in the land. So Egypt was a time of provision for Abraham. It had a positive connotation. Joseph goes to Egypt. As bad as that experience was, and he's sold into slavery and so forth, it was a form of protection, because what was the alternative? His brothers were going to kill him. Option one was, let's kill him. God came along and said, no, let's have option B. We're going to send you to Egypt, where you will have protection. Life will not be a bed of roses, but you'll have protection and provision, really. Then Israel, Jacob, that is to say, the man, comes to Egypt with his 70 family members. Why? In a time of famine again. And what does God give them? Provision. They can eat. And they settle there. Okay? And then, again, 430 years later, God calls them out of Egypt, and they're not supposed to go back. Okay, finally, Jesus, Joseph and Mary and Jesus escape to Egypt. This is a positive connotation. Is what? Protection. Herod is trying to kill Jesus, and he can't do it because they're in Egypt. So I just want you to see that. Again, this is another biblical theology item where we're seeing these events that we keep seeing. Okay, here's something that happened, and then here's something look very similar. This person went to Egypt. This person also went to Egypt. And we see the thread. How are those experiences similar? And then they point to this experience down here, which has to do with Jesus. That's biblical theology. That's looking for all the pointers and see where they point. Okay. So that's the second look. We just wanted to learn a little bit about the Egypt experience. So now I want to talk about in our application, have you had an Egypt experience? This will probably take a little thought. Take a minute and think about this. For most of you, you probably won't have something just leap into your mind. Oh, that was an Egypt experience. Okay? I think this might be one of the harder discussions we've had, and I doubt that half of you maybe have even had this. Okay? What I didn't say a second ago was we don't want to take these Bible stories and make them, force them, square peg in a round hole, force them to be normative. In other words, I am not saying that every believer should have an Egypt experience. I'm not saying that. I don't necessarily believe that that's true. I don't think that follows, certainly not from the text. But I do think that we do have them. It's not uncommon to have them. And when we do have them, I think we can learn from each other's experiences. So, have you ever had a time, what is the Egypt experience? It's when the promises of God are delayed, and yet you are clearly walking in the provision and or protection of God as you await the fulfillment of the promise. Now notice, this is different and distinct from the wilderness experience. There might be some similarities. I'm not sure. But it's not the same. Egypt and the wilderness are not the same thing, okay? So just if you can come up with, you know what, I think this might have been an Egypt experience. The promises of God were delayed, but I was walking in the provision and protection of God. If you can say, I think this was an Egypt experience, share that with your group, and hopefully we'll all learn and benefit from that.